Exactly 50 years ago, something special started in Bowden, Alberta. Since then, the Alberta Conference Camp meeting has touched many lives. And this year, we'd like to go back to how it all began. With the very first theme we had at Foothills Camp. We invite you to the 2023 Alberta Conference Camp meeting. Come join us to celebrate 50 years of moving by His Spirit.
Welcome to Conference Happenings with Debbie. You know, I really enjoy doing these little segments so that you can understand who is working at the conference office and what they do. And today I have an administrator. I love to have the administrators because they're my bosses and it's nice for me to be able to ask them questions. So, Keith, welcome to this little program.
Thank you, Debbie, and it's be fun to answer your questions rather than doing what you tell us to do.
Oh, is that how it works? Well, I sometimes do. I admit that. But usually we work together, and
Yes.
it's a team.
Yes.
So, you know, I'm just going to tell everybody that you're the treasurer.
Correct.
You have another moniker. What is it?
CFO,
CFO means?
Chief Financial Officer, and I use that term outside of the church because people understand that better, and treasurer inside the church.
Yes, because sometimes I'll say treasurer and they'll kind of have a blank look on their face, or they'll just stop and wait for me to tell them what you do.
Yes.
So I understand that both are needed. Well, you've been at the conference for longer than I have been. So how many years have you been there?
17 years.
17?
Yes.
Oh, you're a long ways from me. But did you start out as the actual treasurer?
No, I started as the associate treasurer to Bob Holdall, who was the treasurer, and learned lots from him.
And he still comes by on occasion, doesn't he?
Yes, yes, he does. He is the treasurer for College Heights Church.
Ah, so
And
he still has his hand in it also.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So what did you do before you came to the conference?
Before I started with the conference, I was with Home Hardware, and I worked in their credits and returns department as a supervisor in there for Western Canada.
Sometimes you've also said that you've had a bank that you worked at one point in your life.
Yes, yeah, I started out in banking in the 70s. I'm careful how I say that.
Was that in Saskatchewan or all in Alberta?
That was in Edmonton and Calgary.
Oh, okay. So you've
Yeah.
been both north and south of
Yes,
our conference and our province.
yes.
Well, you know, there's always things that people want to know about the Treasury Department. And I know that there's probably things that you'd like people to know. They might not be the same, but but let's talk a little bit about tithe.
Yes, tithe is our primary source of revenue for the conference. Usually about 80% of all our revenue comes from tithe, and out of tithe we pay our pastor workers, our office workers, and a percentage of our education people. So tithe really is the major part of the work, paying for the work here in Alberta.
And so it's for wages for the people that are actually working in the conference.
Yes.
Pastors and office workers,
Yes.
teachers also?
A percentage of the teachers,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. And what does the rest of the income for the conference come from?
Our Alberta Advance brings in about $500,000 a year, which it doesn't take long to spend that. And then the other major portion is from investments, would be a major portion of revenue. We also get grants from the SDACC and the North American Division for evangelism and for education primarily. And occasionally they will send additional funds to help. Last year they did to help out all the churches with infrastructure, and during COVID they helped out education. And this year they're sending another $227,000 to help with the education and schools within the conference. So we're grateful for their support.
We are. And how many schools do we have?
We have 11 schools.
And do you know the number of churches?
There's about 88, I think, or 89 between the churches and the companies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of upkeep too.
Yes.
And I know the churches do well with their budgets so that they can do a lot of that upkeep.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea, comparing tithes at the midpoint of the year, last year to this year, is it about the same as usual or is it different?
Tithe, we've been really blessed with tithe this year. We're running till the end of May. Our tithe was $7.8 million, and last year it was around $6.2 million. So we are about 25% ahead of where we were last year at this time.
That's very good.
Yeah, and it's interesting because since COVID and during COVID, the Alberta Conference has kind of lagged the other conferences in tithe.
Oh.
And so this year it seems that we are catching up to some of the increases that the other conferences have had.
So you talked a little bit about evangelism, and I know there's an evangelism committee that churches fill out a form and they ask and they tell us what they want to do, and then there's a formula of some sort. What kind of things can you say about evangelism in the Alberta Conference?
Well, one thing is that the Alberta Conference, from my understanding, is one of the most generous conferences in terms of what supporting churches' evangelistic outreach. This year, our conference has committed to about $550,000 to evangelism, to different endeavors across Alberta. Of course, the large Voice of Prophecy series in Calgary. And between the conference and the churches, on those that we've been matching and working with, there's $750,000 that is currently being allocated to evangelism.
So that's the allocation. Now, the conference gives some and the churches come up with the rest. What is that comparison?
Okay, on evangelism series, the conference will pay 65% of the cost, and the local church will pay for 35% of the cost.
So it's a shared cost, and
Yes.
they have to put down what they're going to have, who they're going to bring in, all the costs that's going to happen
Yes.
towards what they're doing.
That's correct, and who's covering what
Yes.
costs, yes.
How
Yeah.
many churches have done that so far up to the midterm? Do you have any idea?
I'm going to say that it's probably about 15 churches this year. Usually it ranges between 15 and 20 some churches a year that will do it, except during COVID when it was pretty quiet during those years.
Yes, it was.
So it's nice to be able to be more active, and because the baptismal results are definitely higher when everyone is doing evangelism and we're all working together on that.
But not every church does evangelism every year.
No.
So they kind of trade off most of the time?
Yes, yeah. It's usually, there are some churches that are fairly regular with their evangelism, but there are others who, maybe have it every second year, sometimes every third year.
And it might not be a huge program like when the Voice of Prophecy came in. It might be something smaller in the community.
That's correct, yeah.
Oh, okay. There's also lots of things happening because there's churches that don't have their own homes.
Yes. When Ken Wiebe first became president, he wanted to do something to help churches. And at that time, we brought in Lou to help organize and take some of the weight off the local churches so the conference could support them in finding churches, and we raised the amount that we were giving from $10,000 to $25,000. And when President Hodder came, he said, "Keith, we've got to do better than that." and so we've been giving $100,000 to new churches that are being built.
So that is if they've purchased one, or if they build one, or is it just for the land? How does that work?
It's usually if you either purchase an existing building or if you build a new one, that we give the $100,000. There was one special circumstance that we did it for the land, and that's because it was for a land deal in Calgary that we just could not pass up, and so we made an exception in that case.
So then when it's time to build on that particular piece of land, then the church has to do their own fundraising
Yes.
and their own budgeting to
Yes.
make that church happen.
Yes,
Okay. Well, all of these things take a lot of time.
they do.
Do you have to do all of the legwork to some of these things?
No, fortunately, I have a great person in Lou Werner who does a lot of assistance. He has a lot of experience in projects and project management, and so he brings that expertise to the table, and it helps not only myself, but it helps the conference officers as well as we look at all the either purchases of land or buildings. It gives us a level of confidence that everything is in place, and we have all the check boxes that Lou makes sure is done, and
Like all the zoning and
Yes.
all of those kinds of things that nobody thinks about
Yeah.
unless they're in construction
Yeah.
almost.
and sometimes Lou is very thorough about this, and sometimes the local church will ask questions about why we have to be so thorough, but then afterwards they will call and let me know, we're so thankful for the work Lou does.
Yes, he's very thorough, that's
yes,
for sure.
Yeah.
So if you were a congregation and you needed to borrow some money, how does that work? I think there's a revolving fund or something that can be utilized in
Yes.
some cases.
Yeah. So on a purchase, whether it's of land, a building, is the requirement is for the local church to have 35% down, and then they are allowed to borrow. They're allowed to borrow up to 4 times their average annual tithe for the last 3 years.
So it's based on their tithe from their church, their congregation.
Yes. Yeah.
So that seems like it's a good deal, but it seems like it could be something that's a lot of money every month to pay it back.
Yeah, and that's why they have the formula, because typically, if you follow that formula, it allows the churches to be able to afford those payments. It was higher at one time, at 5 times the average annual tithe for the last 3 years, but they found a number of congregations couldn't meet the payments at that, so that's why it was dropped back to 4.
And this is the revolving fund comes from the SDACC, am I correct?
That's correct, yes.
So you're borrowing from our own organization and not a bank?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the revolving fund, what they do is they open up deposits to members across Canada. And typically what we have is members who want to earn a little bit of money, but they want to also support the church at the same time. And so they'll put deposits in place at the SDACC, and then that's used across Canada to help churches get into buildings.
That's very nice, and it's very helpful to each of the churches that are in that position. How many churches would you say don't have their own church? I'm putting you on the spot,
yes.
I know.
It's going to be up in around 30 probably.
30 out of our 60 churches?
Yeah. So Yeah, it's at least 30 that
Yes.
wouldn't have.
So they're renting. Do we help them at all as a conference? Do we help them with rent?
In the initial stage, when a church becomes a company, we support them for 1 year at $750 a month.
And while they're bringing their, making gains of members in their church,
Yes.
then they
Yeah.
can have more tithe and.
Yeah.
and
We've also helped a few churches coming out of COVID, as it's taken a while for some churches more than others for the membership to return, and so we've helped financially some of the churches who have had that struggle.
Okay. You know, there's a couple of things that I still want to talk to you about, but I never introduced your wife. And Lorraine, you're sitting so quietly beside your husband. Does he bring homework?
All the time.
All the time. Well, I know that because he's in the office a lot too, and we try to tell him that he should have his own time at home. But, you know, phones these days don't make that possible, do they?
It's a little more difficult.
It is.
I'm not very disciplined at, letting my phone ring.
Yes, yes. But we know that Lorraine is back there at your house, and she's behind you, and she
Yeah.
does things with you and for you. And if you have to go on trips, you sometimes take her with you, and that's a good thing too.
Yeah.
So thank you for being with me.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Lorraine has been a great support
Yes.
for me. She's put up with, numerous
Late
weekends
nights.
and late nights. Yeah.
Yes.
And I appreciate that a lot.
That's just like a pastor.
Much
So,
the same.
Much
yes.
the same as a pastor. So there's a couple of other things I want to ask you, and this one I thought might be a question that would be kind of interesting.
Is this for
especially to
Lorraine
me.
or for me?
This is for you. I wouldn't
Nice
give this
try.
one. I wouldn't give this one to Lorraine. You do go out. You do some preaching. You do some visitation on Sabbath,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, or you just mingle with people in your own congregation. What's the first question people want to know about your job and treasury and the conference?
Okay. Well, I will answer. Lately, the first question people ask me, because I went into sepsis earlier this year, and people were praying for me, and so the first question now is, how are you doing? Is your health doing
Yes.
well? And praise God that I'm happy to say I'm doing well, and thankful that despite they thought for sure I had organ damage, that the tests have shown that I don't have any organ damage.
And
So
we're so grateful.
yes,
There was lots of prayers going up
Yeah.
for when you were sick, and
Yeah.
and we knew that Lorraine was back there praying and
Yes.
being with you,
Yeah.
because that's very hard on
Yeah.
you for sure.
yeah.
We're very grateful for. But what about when you go to a church? Do they just say,
Yeah.
"Where's the money"? What do they say?
One of the frequent questions is, how do I calculate my tithe? Do I
Oh.
do it on gross or do I do it on net? Do I include my CPP and EI deductions or don't I? And so those are some of the questions. And I think the best way to answer it is to look back at the first quarter of the year, where they had a whole quarter on stewardship, and most of the questions are answered there.
Does the conference have a stewardship volunteer that does talk to people about this kind of thing?
We have just voted in someone, Elder
That's
Gary.
familiar.
Yeah, that's familiar. Elder Gary Hodder. And of course, anyone who knows Gary knows that in terms of stewardship and finances and money, that there is no better person in the conference who understands and can communicate it as well as he can.
So he's willing to go to churches and do seminars. Is that part of what he's volunteering to do?
Yes, that's part of what he's volunteering to do. He's doing it on a quarter-time basis,
Okay.
and I think he wants to have some time while he's retired in the sun.
Yes.
So he wants to have that time fun in the sun, but he has graciously given us a part of his retirement time to do this for the church. It's a very important work.
Working with him and with you, I know that he enjoys doing that too.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so if you need some stewardship workshops, Pastor Hodder is the one to get in
Yes.
touch with. Okay, just one more question, and that's about the staffing in Treasury. I know I always look around and I'm going, wow, they have a lot of people. But do they really have a lot of people?
Well, I can tell you this, that after our audit and financial committee meet, their concern is always for the volume of work that is being accomplished by the staff and whether or not we are putting too much pressure on them. And so that's something that we do wrestle with.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is, and more so since COVID, is having volunteers at the local level for Treasury and at the local school level. And so we are far more involved in local work than we have been in the past. Also in education, when I started at the conference, we had less than 700 students.
Yes.
And now we are almost at 1,400, just a few students shy of 1,400. We have more high schools, and the government's expectations are quite a bit higher of accountability and the reports that we have to fill out. There was barely anything we had to fill out when I first started, and now it's very detailed and schedules, and so there is significantly more work to do, and it requires more of a professional at the local level, and so that makes it harder. And then, of course, in the absence of that, then we need to take that on, and because we have to have that reporting not only to be audited from an outside auditing firm, but for GCAS as well.
GCAS being the General Conference Auditing Services.
Yes, yeah.
So you're accountable to everybody.
Yes, yeah. As much fun as it is to do an audit, we have to do two of them.
Yes. Well, even for the conference itself, you have to do an audit also, not just...
Yes.
It's a separate one from education, however, so there's double the work.
Yes, and the education one, they not only audit each of our schools, but they audit the head office as well.
So we are getting double
Yes,
audited in
yes.
every way you look at it.
Yes.
Well, this just gives us a little taste of what you do, because I know that you do a lot more.
Yeah.
You're in meetings all the time, and you're on the phone a lot. And when we see him with his phone in the hall and he's pacing, we know it's a very important call, because he likes to pace and talk at the same time.
Yes.
So I hope that you as a listener and a church member have a better understanding of what maybe Treasury is all about. It's not just let's pay our tithe and that's it, because there's so much more to it than that. If you should happen to see Lorraine and Keith as they're wandering around at camp meeting here, don't be afraid to come and ask them the questions, and maybe the hard questions, but he's always very willing to talk to anybody. So is there anything else that you would like to say to the members?
I want to say one thing. Solomon Agdon has been a faithful associate treasurer in the conference since 2012. Not only has he been faithful at our work, but he has been a strong supporter in the local church and in the Filipino camp meetings and all that. He's been very active. Recently, he has received a call to the Montana conference, and so we're sad to see him go. He's been so faithful, a good friend, and someone you can depend upon.
Yes,
just
for sure.
quietly goes about his work, and you never have to worry about it not being done. And it's a great loss for us, but it's a great gain for the Montana. And we learn when you're at the conference level. You look at the large church as a whole, you know, and not just as our conference. And we're all in it together, and we support one another. And so we're happy for Montana, but he will be greatly missed as well as his family, and we'll miss dear Rosie as well.
But they will be with us for camp meeting.
Yes.
And so it's after camp meeting that they leave. So if you happen to see Solomon and Rosie egged on, give them your blessing as they go on to another appointment.
Yes. And I also want to thank each and every member of the church for their faithfulness and their support of the conference and the World Church as a whole. I'm proud to say that the Alberta Conference is one of the largest supporters of world missions of any conference in North America. You know, so just the view, the world view that the Alberta Conference members have of the church is to be commended, and I really appreciate that. And thank you. I thank each and every one of you for your support, and I look forward to continue to serve the constituents as we go forward.
Thank you, and thank you for being with me. Thank you for listening to this, and like I said, we enjoy having Keith, and Lorraine sometimes comes by too, and we enjoy both of you, and we are very glad that you're in our conference. Thank you again for listening.